an AI program is only as good as its data set. The thing that worries me is different people with different motivations giving a version of ChatGPT biased data sets. I think that's really concerned. Now, I just read today in my Nature magazine that they were using that program for scientific stuff, and it did a really bad job. And then they gave it a whole pile of scientific journal articles to read, and then it learned. What we've got to be doing in these days of AI, you've got to go back and look at primary sources. One of the things I'm having my students do is, and I've been having them do this for 10 years, so this assignment, where they have to pick out something in animal behavior, ask a question. Well, do birds actually have a magnetic sense, for example? Actually, they do. But I want them to go into different scientific databases and give me journal articles. In other words, learn about using primary scientific sources. And when I polled my students, only about 5 out of over 50 students even knew the databases existed. And what worries me is people just taking these little summaries that a bot serves up to you. And they need to go back and do regular search. All right, let's take news stuff. How do you go back to primary news sources? And how do you read the web addresses to make sure they're not spoofed? And I think it's getting more and more important to check primary resources for things. And it tends to hallucinate when it doesn't have enough data. Because this new thing I just read this morning, they then fed scientific papers into it. And there's been situations where it's passing the bar exam. It's inventing new chemical things, protein folding things. Wow. And looking at the future, what kind of jobs are going to go out. I can tell you right now, anything that's hands-on, like a staff member at one of your places, that's not going to get replaced with AI. Well, I can see a lot of low-level programming jobs going out, but the things that's not going to go out, high-end skilled trades, and also people want like live appearances. People. One thing we learned during COVID, people want to go back in the gyms and be with people. That's not going to change. So anything that involves personal interaction, people are still going to want live classes. But true. I can see something like a doctor diagnosis stuff going out. I can see that's some of the first stuff going out.
Wow.
It's real high-end knowledge, specialized things. But you still, now Google plans to keep next to their bot an old-fashioned search box. And I think it's very important that people use that search box. And then how do you make sure the web address is correct? Well, it would be ABC, .com or something like that be correct. Does it have hyphens in it or something like that? That's not a correct web address. I think we need to be more and more like the assignment I have my students looking up journal articles on scientific databases. 10 years ago, AI wasn't on my radar, but it is now. The single most important thing you may learn in my class on livestock handling won't be livestock handling. It's going to be looking up scientific primary sources and learning how to do it. And I think a lot of people are going to just use the little summary that AI dishes up to you. But it's only as good as its training database, and it learns. I talked to an English teacher who was catching her high school students with special software using chat to write their papers. Mm-hmm. And she said that since November, it's been getting better at writing student papers. It's learning. And I'm concerned about protecting major industrial systems. I think another thing we've got to be more transparent about and people are concerned about is what the database is feeding chat. Because the other thing that's going to happen is there's a new version like Chat 4 or something like that out now.
Yeah.
But they, let's say you're getting subdivisions of chat with deliberately biased databases fed into them. I can see that as being a gigantic mess. Please actually go to the 4 databases. Maybe one of the most important things you're going to learn. and it's more important than livestock handling, which is what my class is about. Since it is a behavior class, they do have to pick a behavior subject, but I'll let them do any animal. But I want them to learn how to use those databases and know they exist.
Yeah.
You need to go to primary sources, major networks, major radio stations, major newspapers, things that are, primary sources for news.
Yeah.
And you need to go on their websites and make sure the addresses haven't been spoofed.
Yeah.
And go back to primary sources. They're now figuring out ways to make fake videos that going to primary sources. Okay, you've got like your Associated Press, you got your Reuters, the old-fashioned news, what used to be called the wire feeds, like the way your local paper gets the international news from Associated Press, and go to those websites. But going back to primary sources. So I'm going to make up a very stupid example. Okay, they've discovered purple snakes in the upper stratosphere. I am sure that is BS. But there's other stuff that people, I can't believe some of the crap that people believe. I think if I go on the scientific databases, there's no evidence that there's purple snakes flying around in the upper stratosphere. And I've deliberately picked a really ridiculous thing because the controversial subjects get so emotional, I just avoid them. I'm interested in helping people who think differently to get great jobs and things like that. Promoting my book on visual thinking, because we've got to recognize that different kinds of thinking exist and they bring different skill sets in. You see, I can see something that might be a problem. A mathematician calculates a problem. And there's a tendency to have some of the technology people to have too rosy a view of the future. I'm concerned about industrial processes getting hacked. Well, there's ways to protect them. Old-fashioned mechanical devices, electromechanical, solenoids, gets too hot, spins too fast, gets too much pressure, she shuts down, no remote restart, certain critical systems being isolated from the internet completely, because I'm concerned about physical infrastructure. When I first started, I worked for a feedlot construction company, and they had one of their offices burned down because a coffee pot went dry. And so when we left the office, and I actually did this for a whole year, if I was the one last to leave, I had to go out in the back of the building and flip the giant, huge main switch to turn off all the electricity in that building. And you got in trouble if you didn't do it. And we actually ended up breaking the main switch.
Oh.
And they wanted to make sure that no heating elements were left on. I can tell you, something with a heating element or something that could cause a flood, I don't want that connected to the internet, period. There's already been hackers that have gotten into water systems, and we're commanding them to put too many chemicals into the water supply. Fortunately, the pipes were narrow enough that the operator saw the mouse arrow moving around on his screen, and stopped it. No, I don't. I think things that could burn up a house or flood it, I don't want connected to the internet. So I'll never forget. It was a big main switch. It had a red handle about this long, and you had to go make like kachunka. Then you had to shut the door on the switch box. Oh. I did it a whole bunch of times. You were the last one to leave, and if you didn't do it, the boss would get really mad. You remember the movie Hal and the Space Odyssey? It's lucky that the spacesuit that David was in did not have a Wi-Fi connection, because if it did, Hal could have turned off the air in the spacesuit. He had a dumb spacesuit that wasn't connected. Hal couldn't turn the air off in the spacesuit. But what you want to have is old-fashioned controls that will turn the whole thing off if it starts to do something dangerous.
Yeah.
Get too hot, spin too fast, get too much pressure. You got a creepy interview with Chat with the New York Times. Well, it's creepy. And they were saying, well, what would your Jungian self want to do? Kind of like you're not allowed to do. And the thing writes back, delete Bing's files, scramble them, and put up offensive content. I am sitting on a plane reading that. And now they restrict now the amount of questions you can ask it. to stop it from going down the rabbit hole.
Why would it why would it think that or decide to say that?
Well, it said that. And I am sitting on this plane reading that in the New York Times, and I'm going, a computer said that? You've got to be kidding. What is consciousness? In fact, in my book, Visual Thinking, I talk about animal consciousness. And in order to be conscious, you have to have a centralized, some centralized brain area where you've got inputs and outputs and association areas. To be conscious, a self-awareness. They're finding now that other more and more animals have that. What is consciousness? And an employee at Google got fired for saying the bot was conscious. This is where you need to check multiple primary sources.
Yeah.
Like all 3 networks, plus the BBC and all of our networks. Check them, all 3 of them.
Yeah.
Reuters, AP. I think the most important thing we can teach students right now is the importance of primary sources. And I'm glad Google plans to put a search box next to their bot. And I want to encourage people to use it. I cannot emphasize that enough. Now, I remember when I was in college, eons ago in the 60s, my history teacher telling me about, something like Encyclopedia Britannica is not a primary source. And that when you do a term paper about something, you don't use Encyclopedia Britannica. You've got to go back to primary sources. That might be a newspaper or a magazine.
Oh.
Or a radio show. Something like that, or a TV show, something that's the primary source. Well, that's even more important today. We need to be teaching students to go to primary sources. When I was a young 20-something, the aggregators were things like the Encyclopedia Britannica. Now we've got all kinds of aggregators, but looking at primary sources for things to find out what's really true. To go on a regular old-fashioned search and type in the names of the news networks, and then you need to look at the addresses, make sure they, proper web addresses don't have dashes and commas and stuff like that in them. Learn how to look at web addresses, and also check multiple primary sources.
Multiple.
Yeah. But I can't believe some of the junk that people believe. It's just beyond me. And some of it gets down to just not having any training in science. Some of the stuff that goes on, I'm an extremely logical person. I can't believe it. I just flabbergasted me some of the crap that people believe. This whole thing with the artificial intelligence, I cannot emphasize enough learning how to look at primary sources. I absolutely, for anything. I mean, let's say it dishes up medical information. Well, I'm a trained scientist, so if it was really going to be, if it's my medical problem, I'm going to go look up on the PubMed database some nice refereed scientific journal articles. Or I'm going to go to multiple sites like Mayo Clinic, WebMD. Is it telling me the same thing on each one of those sites about my medical problem? Multiple primary sources. I can't emphasize that enough. And I'm now realizing that an internet project I started 10 years ago with my livestock handling class, I think it might be the single most important thing those kids are going to learn. Now that ChatGPT. Now, back when I started that internet project, ChatGPT was never crossed my mind. No, but I think it's more important that we've got to, on stuff that really matters, check multiple primary sources. Because this bot can fabricate stuff, especially if it doesn't have enough information. Then it makes stuff up. And they call it hallucinating. You want to see something really creepy? And I've written about it in this book. And it's kind of a long time ago. They took an AI program and they forced it to find dogs in pictures that didn't have dogs. And there's creepy pictures of the sky with eyes in it, grocery shelves with eyes in them. So what they did is they kept forcing the program to try to find dogs in pictures that did not have dogs, like pictures of the skies, pictures of a grocery store shelf full of products. And then it might see an apple on a tree and that turned into an eye. Like very, very creepazoid. maybe you better listen to this old lady. It's a good tool.
Yeah.
And it's like tools are good things. All right, let's just take something like saws.
Yeah.
A hand saw is it'd be very hard to like chop your arm off with a hand saw. Chainsaw, take it off instantly. That
Yeah.
doesn't mean chainsaws are bad, but you have to be a lot more careful with them.